With the New Orleans Saints expected to finalize their deal with Kellen Moore very soon, looking ahead to the NFL draft should be all about trying to find him the generational playmaker that will lead his offense. We got all that and a little bit of lagniappe for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? I am your host, your friend, Ross Jackson, New Orleans native, your New Orleans Saints expert and credentialed member of the media covering those New Orleans Saints as the Saints beat writer over at LouisianaSports.net and Saints analyst with WWL TV. And on today's episode of Locked On Saints, it's a 7-round Kellen Moore themed mock draft. We'll dive into some of the late round defensive depth talent that exists in the later part of the draft. I'll tell you why the middle rounds of the draft will be the difference between teams winning and losing their selection process. And we're going to kick everything off with the generational playmakers available at pick 9 in round 1 that the New Orleans Saints should be looking to take advantage of. We appreciate you very much, as always, for making us your first listen and for being an everydayer here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode, we're taking a look at this 7-round mock draft for Kellen Moore, which should be all about straddling him up with his perfect fit to lead his offense. The news right now is that here on Tuesday, February 11th, my birthday, by the way, that Kellen Moore's deal could get done and be finalized as soon as today. So we'll be keeping an eye out on that. If so, we'll be hopping on live and doing everything to make sure you got all that news. But then things becoming sort of an announcement coming from the team on Wednesday. Not sure when that would end up kind of correlating with what his introductory press conference would be. I'm sure that has everything to do with his travel schedule and kind of the schedule with the team and all these other things. So we'll see exactly what that means. But as expected, just days after the Super Bowl, this should be finalized here soon. Could be finalized while I'm recording the show here today. So if so, we'll have some fun with that. But today I want to focus on the 7-round mock draft. We're calling it a mock draft Tuesday today. And I'm going to start off with the first 2 rounds here, round 1, round 2. We're going to start off with running back Ashton Jeanty out of Boise State, the generational running back, over 2,600 rushing yards in 2024. I know that his Penn State performance, in which he still ran for over 100 yards, by the way, on 30 carries, so I will say that, was something that maybe soured people on because it is very much a what have you done for me lately kind of, recency bias kind of thing. Anytime that you're talking about adding somebody to the team, I get all that. But I'm not going to let that erase everything else and the other 2,500 plus yards that he had picked up, or 2,400 plus yards that he had picked up before that game as a running back. The thing that you hear about Kellen Moore constantly that we broke down in yesterday's episode is, well, Kellen Moore is going to take the job with New Orleans, but he doesn't have a Saquon Barkley. He doesn't have a Jalen Hurts. He doesn't have an elite offensive line, yada, yada. Well, fine. Go and get him some talent to let him do that. And that's why a guy like Ashton Jeanty, just as much as a guy like Saquon Barkley, makes sense in the first round. Y'all, the first round running back's back. Like the draft people and all the other stuff and everybody that are so against and positional value and this, that, and the other, they kind of just have to deal with it now. But the draft, the first round running back is back in the draft. In fact, Ashton Jeanty might not even be the only first round running back, with Marion Henderson, with Dylan Sampson, and other really, really awesome running backs in this class. And I get that the running back pool is deep in this class, but so is the defensive line pool. So is the offensive line pool. The middle rounds of this draft are where you're going to win and lose it. Right now, this is all about getting a generational playmaker that can come in and be the number 1 option in Kellen Moore's offense and eventually take over for Alvin Kamara in that way. Be a good partner with Alvin Kamara, can run both inside and outside, kind of gives you a little bit of diversity there, is an all-around back, somebody that Kellen Moore lit up when I asked about him during Super Bowl week and everything, talked about how talented he is and all the incredible things that he's done, and him being a complete back, I believe is the phrase that he used. I mean, just incredible stuff all the way through. So it's just what you should be expecting at this point, that they should go out in this first round and retrieve Kellen Moore, a generational playmaker, to help them out. Teteroa McMillan, if he were on the board, I might have gone with him, if I'm being honest, the wide receiver out of Arizona, because I think of him as a generational talent as well. And if you've been following the show for a while, that's not a phrase that I throw out at all. In fact, typically I hate that phrase. But for these two guys, Tetaroa McMillan, Ashton Jeanty, and I'd probably throw Abdul Carter in there as well. That's what they are to me. And that's not a phrase that I use very lightly. In fact, I don't think I've ever used that phrase without mocking it on this show before. That's how seriously I like these guys. So I would watch out for this. I think that this is a pick that makes a lot of sense. We'll see exactly what happens. But Tetaroa McMillan, Ashton Jeanty, Abdul Carter, any of those three on the board, you sprint and you take that player at number 9. So excellent stuff and an excellent opportunity to be able to do that. Could you take Jaxson Dart at 9? Yeah, but for me, he's somebody that's a day 2, early day 3 selection, as are all the other quarterbacks behind Cam Ward, as well as Shedeur Sanders. That's no slight of Jaxson Dart. I think that he's really, really talented, and something tells me we'll be talking about him here in just a little bit. In round 2, pick number 40, still on the board, and I've seen this multiple times now, not being selected in the first round. Elic Ayomanor, the big-bodied wide receiver out of Stanford. So if he ends up being there, or somebody that has that similar build, a Jack Bech out of TCU, right? Somebody that is physical, plays big, all those other pieces. That's something that I really like. Elic Ayomanor is somebody that is 6'2" plus, 6'3", 200 plus pounds, runs very physically, but also is a really, really crisp route runner. Not the fastest guy in the world, but you've got the fast guys already. You've got Rashid Shaheed that can take the top off of a defense. You've got Chris Olave, who has elite speed as well. Go and get the guy that can do everything at all 3 levels and be your, 1st and 10 slant pass, be your 3rd and 2 dig route, be your 3rd and 2 out route. Like, go and get the guy that can be that for you, that can box everybody out, play bigger and more physical than the guy that's lined up across from him. That, to me, those 2 picks, like an Ashton Jeanty and an Elic Ayomanor, or an Ashton Jeanty, Elic Ayomanor, or an Ashton Jeanty and a Jack Bech. Or if you flip that around, right? Let's say that you land Tetaroa McMillan in the first round, and then you turn around and you draft a Dylan Sampson in the second, and Omarion Hampton in the second if they fall out of the first. A Quinshon Judkins in the 3rd out of Ohio State, or maybe a Cam Scadaboo in the 2nd round. Like, for me, those 2 right there, whether you go with a 1st round running back and a 2nd round wide receiver, or a 1st round wide receiver and a 2nd round running back, all wins in terms of what you're going to be able to look to build for Kellen Moore in his new offense here in New Orleans. All right, coming up next, the mid rounds are huge in this draft. From pick 71 through picks 129 are what we're going to break down, the 3rd and 4th rounds that can absolutely be game changers for you in this year's draft. And for the New Orleans Saints, I think we build them out a really, really good future here with those same selections. We got that coming up for you next as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints is brought to you by our friends over at PrizePicks, the easiest and most fun way to play daily fantasy sports. I know the football season is over, but basketball rolls along both in the pros and in college. So a ton for you to get in on. Jason Tatum, 29 points, more or less. That's all you got to do, right? They'll give you a stat projection just like that. You take 2 to 6 players, you choose more or less, you get those right, you can win up to 1,000 times your cash. And don't miss some of their promos like Taco Tuesday, where you can get some discounted player projections for even more future value as well. I absolutely love PrizePicks. None of the dealing with bad trade requests, no managing injuries and setting lineups. It's you and your knowledge of your favorite sports against the house over at PrizePicks. Go and check them out today. All you got to do is download the app and use the promo code LOCKEDONNFL. You'll get $50 instantly when you play your first $5 lineup. That's promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $50 instantly when you play your first $5 lineup over at PrizePicks. Run your game. All right, family. Everybody thinks about the first round of the NFL draft, but in this year's selection process, it's the middle rounds at the end of day 2 and beginning of day 3 that can win or lose your favorite team's selection process. So let's dive into 4 of the next selections for the New Orleans Saints. Remember, the Saints have 9 picks in this draft. Would love to see them use all of those selections, not necessarily move around too much more than they need to, unless they're getting some other picks in return. But man, just an opportunity here to really start to kind of create that influx of youth for this team and for supposed, presumed new head coach, Kellen Moore. We'll see where things go here in the next little bit. But here in rounds 3 and 4, I was able to pick up a haul for the New Orleans Saints, and this required a couple of falls, but nothing too crazy. So I'm really feeling this. So we'll see where things go with the combine and how that affects some of this. But here, as of February 11th, this is what I was able to do in round 3. Round 3, I was at pick 71. I grabbed Alfred Collins. I ran this. This is the defensive tackle from Texas. I ran this projection multiple times. He seems to hover around kind of the 65 to 75 area on multiple different boards and things like that. So this wasn't actually as surprising as I thought, because we typically, at the beginning of the season, we're talking about Alfred Collins as a first-round guy, potential first-round defensive tackle, but able to grab him. And then at pick 93 in round 3, was able to take LSU tight end Mason Taylor. And I know, moan groan, the Saints don't draft LSU players, but listen, they haven't drafted an LSU player in a while. Typically, the average is around like once every 9 years or so. So they're a little bit overdue, because I believe the last LSU player, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe the last LSU player that they drafted, not signed as a UDFA, but drafted, selected in the draft, was what, Will Clapp, the offensive lineman years ago? So they're a bit overdue or kind of right on time in terms of getting a selection in. So for both of those guys, I think those would be huge wins. And of course, again, as we always say, right, like we'll see how the draft kind of the combine impacts draft stock and everything. These guys can move up and down and all that. But finding players of this similar ilk or similar build or whatever at this range, just as valuable as the names themselves. So we're looking just as much as the archetype, or at the archetype, as we are actually looking at the players themselves. So maybe it's not an Alfred Collins, but maybe it's a Deion Walker, right? Maybe it's not a Mason Taylor, but maybe it's a Mitchell Evans or a Harold Fannin Jr. or an Elijah Arroyo. Like, it, you know what I mean? So whatever. It doesn't matter the name. What matters is the build, the archetype. But in this case, these names, pretty solid. So Alfred Collins, 6'5", 320 pounds, plays a lot of nose tackle. Exactly what it is that the New Orleans Saints need. Somebody that's a big body that can plug up the middle. He's not much of a pressure guy. 17 pressures or hurries generated last year, 18 the year before that. But that's not necessarily what you need. You got Brian Brzee for that. He was outstanding last year. Should continue to get better, and should continue to get better, with better talent around him as well. I know that the big thing is going to be, can the Saints go out there and get Milton Williams from the Philadelphia Eagles, bring him back to Louisiana? He's a Louisiana State grad, or Louisiana Tech grad, and so being able to get him back to Louisiana would be great, but not holding my breath on that, because that's going to be a pricey and spicy contract. So Alfred Collins, getting him here, not even a consolation prize. Excellent opportunity there for New Orleans. And in grabbing Mason Taylor, for me, I know 546 receiving yards last season with LSU, 55 catches, didn't necessarily blow the top off in a way that Harold Fannin Jr. and Bowling Green did, or Tyler Warren at Penn State did, with a pair of touchdowns for Mason Taylor. But I got to tell you, Mason Taylor to me is kind of the perfect tight end for a Kellen Moore. 6'5", 255 pounds, can run, can catch, can run routes, can block, all around, kind of does it all. I'm not going to try to put this level of expectation on him, because I think it's a little unfair, but has that all-around quality that Kellen Moore told me that he liked in Dallas Goedert. I'm not saying that Mason Taylor is going to be Dallas Goedert. Put your pitchfork down. But all that I'm saying is that he has that all-around ability that a guy like Dallas Goedert has, and he has more athleticism than maybe he's credited for. I think I got an opportunity to see that at the Senior Bowl. And the fact that he's a Senior Bowl guy makes him even more likable for New Orleans. You know that they love their Senior Bowl guys and everything. So had an impressive performance in Mobile, had an impressive performance in Baton Rouge. He's somebody that we've been watching for a while here on the show. This could be the opportunity in the 3rd round for New Orleans. Let's jump ahead to the 4th round now. And here's where, even though I didn't take him in the 1st round, where I was still able to grab Ole Miss quarterback Jaxson Dart. I'm typically looking at the quarterback class and going, hey, behind the big two or the top two, I'm not really worried about investing here. But with 9 selections and a lot of opportunity to continue to build, I went ahead and rolled the dice for this mock draft in particular. Jaxson Dart, coming out of Ole Miss, 6'1", 220-ish pounds, kind of similar build to Jalen Hurts, who I believe is 6'2", 225, something like that. And so being able to grab a guy that fits the same sort of physical mold as a Jalen Hurts, that has mobility, that led the SEC in passing yards last season with 4,276, 29 passing touchdowns to just 6 interceptions was no fluke. The season before that, 23 passing touchdowns to just 5 interceptions. Takes care of the football, completed almost 70% of his passes last year. You could talk me into it with no issue, as long as look at what we hit before we got to this point, right? We got the generational running back. We hit on the big bodied wide receiver that the team is desperately in need of. We we helped the defensive line big time on the interior, and we grabbed another big offensive weapon in Mason Taylor to contribute. That's pretty solid. The only thing we haven't addressed yet is edge rusher, but don't worry, we're about to. This is a good spot to where if you're going to roll the dice on another quarterback for a third year in a row in the draft, Jake Haener 2 years ago, Spencer Rattler last year, Jaxson Dart this year, this would be the time to do it. I feel like if you're going to roll with Jaxson Dart, you might as well see what you have in Spencer Rattler. That's just my opinion, but I'm okay with being wrong. If that's the way that the Saints want to go and you're trying to find somebody that's the most Jalen Hurtsy without being while still having, like less quarterback questions than a Jalen Milroe will have, Jaxson Dart's a guy that makes sense, but there's no need to run for him at 9. There's just not a need to do that. I know the media is saying that, but that's, as I say, as a member of the media, but that's not what the scouts are saying. That's not what the teams are saying. And so Jaxson Dart, 3rd round or 4th round, if he's there, makes perfect sense. And then finally, to wrap up the 4th round here, Oluwafemi Oladejo, a guy that I really like coming out of UCLA. He's an edge rusher, a little undersized, but the big name that has continued to pop up for defensive coordinator here in New Orleans is Brandon Staley. Brandon Staley is used to guys like Leonard Floyd and Khalil Mack and sort of these guys that are stand-up rushers around the edge that are either, a little slim in Leonard Floyd's case, or Khalil Mack is like one of the best pass rushers we've ever seen in the NFL. I'm not trying to put Oluwafemi Oladejo on that same level, but again, a guy that is at the time that Staley worked with him was like in the latter part of his career. And so being able to find and utilize a guy like this, get him paired with a potential defensive line coach like Eric Henderson, who was with Staley in Los Angeles, New Orleans native, bring him in as the new defensive line coach. I'd like to see what you can do there. 6'3", 250 pounds is Oluwafemi. 7 sacks according to PFF. PFF counts sacks weird though. But a pass rush win rate of over 10%. That puts him in a good spot. And also was productive against the run. So really excellent stuff despite that size. And I think, again, the Saints need that speed rusher. Oluwafemi Oladejo could be that guy out of UCLA. Coming up next, we're taking a look at some defensive depth players that we can add, including one player that one Saints defender told me is going to make a great pro. We got that coming up for you next as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints brought to you by friends over at FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Yes, the NFL season might be under, but the NBA might be over rather, but the NBA season is officially underway, continues underway, and you can get in on a ton of the action over there. So as each game tips off, FanDuel has everything that you need. A heavy favorite later on today, the Philadelphia 76ers -9 over the Toronto Raptors. You got the Knicks -2.5 up against the Pacers. You've got the Detroit Pistons, road favorites, 4 points over the Chicago Bulls. And then, of course, the Memphis Grizzlies -3.5 over the Phoenix Suns as well. So you can get in on all of that and much more over at FanDuel today. And it gets even better for new customers. Head over to FanDuel.com today. And as a new customer, you'll get $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's all you got to do. FanDuel.com. Head over there today and get your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partners of the NBA. Let's get it, Who Dat Nation. I'm loving this mock draft so far, and it only gets better from here because late in the draft is an absolute opportunity for this team to continue to build up some really solid depth over on the defensive side. I was able to wrap this up. 2 picks in the 6th round, 2 picks in the 7th round, no picks in the 5th. So just as a recap of what we have so far, running back Ashton Jeanty starts us off. Elic Ayomanor out of Stanford in round 2. Round 3 was defensive tackle Alfred Collins out of Texas, as well as Mason Taylor, the tight end out of LSU. Round 4, we were able to lead off with Jaxson Dart, the Ole Miss quarterback. Probably going to go a little bit earlier than that. Might be more of a round 3 guy, but he was here on this simulator, so we ran with it. I like him as a day 2, day 3 selection, not so much somebody that I'd stretch for in the first round. And then we wrapped up the first round of day 3, round 4, with Oluwafemi Oladejo, the defensive end, speed rusher type mold out of UCLA, because I think that that's where we're going to see the Saints going here as they move forward. I don't think you're going to see a bunch of investments on the big defensive ends. And I will say this too, like, it has been reported that the Saints are reportedly, I think the phrase was open-minded about bringing back Chase Young, which is all fine and dandy and great. Like, I'm open-minded about not paying my taxes sometimes, but when it comes down to it, I'm paying my taxes. So you might be open-minded to keeping Chase Young, but once the number hits and you got to make that decision, you might not pay Chase Young, and that ends up making sense, right? And just as a reminder around all that, if the Saints end up not signing Chase Young and Chase Young goes somewhere to, and takes a big contract, and the Saints get a compensatory pick in 2026, depending upon what other moves they make, and, certain moves cancel each other out for comp picks and things like that. So the Saints could actually walk away with a little bit of a win when it comes to that. So just remember that it's not all lost if the Saints don't retain Chase Young, who provided a lot of pressures last year, but didn't really do a great job finishing plays at the quarterback, something that this Saints team struggles with across the board. So I think revamping the defensive line is more important than retention on the defensive line. But I get it for 2025. Not a ton you're going to be able to do this year in free agency anyway. So up next, before we get to the defensive depth, I was able to take Ajani Cornelius, the Oregon offensive lineman, 6'5", 315, has played most of his career at right tackle, but I think you can move him inside in the NFL. Just gives you an opportunity to add somebody that has run that Oregon run system, that's accustomed to, blocking on the move and getting on the move as an offensive lineman, all that. I think that the Saints are going to be better off finding their next left guard starter in free agency than waiting for the draft, at least with the pool as it is right now. But we'll see how things go when it comes to like who sticks with their teams, all those other things. But I'm more about building up that offensive line depth in this draft than I am necessarily worried about finding a starter. But like a Georgia's Tate Ratledge could go in the 3rd or 4th round. Excellent selection for New Orleans. Like, those types of opportunities will certainly be there. Let's go next to our next selection, our final selection in round 6. RJ Mickens, the safety out of Clemson. I'm still fingers crossed that the Saints bring Will Harris Jr. back. I thought he was excellent for them. Somebody that brought a lot of energy, brought a lot of fire, tenacity, really, really excellent communicator, something that maybe doesn't necessarily show up, like that's not going to show up on a stat sheet, something that like the commentary and broadcast isn't going to talk about, but he's a phenomenal communicator. And I thought that he was a good boost for New Orleans. And so the next thing that you're looking for is, can you find somebody else that you can pair with Jordan Howden for your future potentially, or develop into all that, whatever it might be. 2 interceptions this last year, surrendered just 1 touchdown, had a forced incompletion rate of 24.1%, one of the best in the country, did RJ Mickens. He played in the box, he played in the slot, he played deep as well. So he's a versatile safety that you can move around. Great size as well at 6 foot, 210 pounds, coming out as a graduate student. So a lot of experience, a lot of knowledge, 13 games this year, 11 games last year, 13 games the year before that. So durability concerns, not necessarily a thing there. Good against the run, solid against the pass, like really, really good in coverage. And so I think he just gives you an opportunity to have another versatile piece that you're drafting in the 6th round. You don't have to have starter expectations for the guy. It's just, can you develop him, right? Can you find a piece that can add depth to the position, that can contribute on special teams, and that might have some development potential. And a guy like RJ Mickens definitely has some development potential. Speaking of development potential, as we get into the 7th round here, I want to remind you, the 7th round is not a place to go looking for starters, all right? The 7th round is the place to go looking for a special teamer or 2 that might be able to stick on your team because of what they can do on special teams. And then if they have the opportunity to continue to develop from there, then they can. Think Rico Payton. Rico Payton, the cornerback from last year out of Pittsburgh State, was not a 7th round draft pick. He was a UDFA, so it's a little bit different. I get it. But effectively, like, we can talk about these guys the same way. He joins the New Orleans Saints, sticks on because of what he can do on special teams, even though he struggled all through training camp, or through the majority of training camp, and then went ham. I haven't used that phrase in a long time. I don't think anyone has. So I've just embarrassed myself a little bit, but not enough for me to care. but went absolutely insane during the preseason. And then stuck on the team because of how good he was at corner, even though the opportunity that he had throughout the season came on special teams. And he became a fantastic gunner for the team, was outstanding next to JT Gray. They met at the punt returner several times. Speaking of, by the way, with Kellen Moore expected to take the job in New Orleans, expect Darren Rizzi to go to Denver or somewhere else. He'll go on. He'll get another opportunity to be a head coach at another time. That's for certain. And expect Phil Galliano, the assistant special teams coach that's been here in New Orleans for quite some time now, to be at least a top candidate for the special teams coordinator job. So it'd be great to kind of keep things in the Rizzi family when it comes to all that. And then maybe ends up sticking around as the assistant special teams coach to Galliano. We'll see where things go there. But anyway, that's what you're looking for in all this, right? Is people that are going to be able to come in, contribute in special teams, and then be able to do that. So here's the guy that I really like. 6'2", 230-ish pound linebacker Aaron Smith out of South Carolina State. Active, was at the Shrine Bowl. Our guy Darian over at Locked On HBCU broke him down and really kind of followed him. Darian knows linebacker play really well. And so Aaron Smith is a guy that I'm excited about as a potential coming in, helping on special teams. We don't know like which linebackers are in, which linebackers are out next season and everything. You find a guy like Aaron Smith, you can invest in him here in the late rounds and be able to see what you're able to kind of build when it comes to him, over the course of, a rookie contract or something like that. And then finally, I went with Oregon cornerback Jabbar Muhammad. This is a guy that somebody in the Saints locker room actually put me on to. A Saints defender put me on to this guy and said, look, he's going to be a really, really good professional. So 5'10", 185 pounds, a little bit undersized, but can contribute on special teams to start, will need to bulk up. And when I have a defensive player that's currently in the NFL that says, hey, this player will be a good pro, and then I have the opportunity to mock draft, to draft him in the 7th round, sure, I'll roll the dice. Like, twist my arm, why don't you? So 12 forced incompletions last year, really solid there. Completion percentage allowed of only 46.8% and a passer rating allowed of only 72.4%. Allowed 1 touchdown, no interceptions. The year before that had 3 interceptions. Lined up out wide, played a little bit in the slot, but not enough. I think you're looking at him as an outside corner. So grab him, see what you can develop him into, all that. So there you go. Jabbar Muhammad wraps this up for this mock draft. So just as a very quick recap, I'm just going to do names here. Ashton Jeanty, Elic Ayomanor, Alfred Collins, Mason Taylor, Jaxson Dart, Oluwafemi Oladejo, Ajani Cornelius. You've got RJ Mickens, Aaron Smith, Jabbar Muhammad. Really solid start, and then see what you're able to continue to build over the course of the rest of the offseason. So there you go. That's our mock draft for Kellen Moore. You're welcome, Kellen. You can have that. My birthday, but happy birthday to you. That's my birthday present to you right there. All right, y'all. Coming up in tomorrow's episode, hopefully we'll be talking about the New Orleans Saints next head coach. We got all that coming up for you here throughout the week as we continue to cover what is going to be a massive week for the New Orleans Saints. We appreciate you very much, as always, for making us a part of your day, part of your routine, for saying yes to me and the show. If you see me, please say hi. And if you need anything else around your New Orleans Saints in between these episodes, make sure you follow me on your favorite social media at Ross Jaxson, NOLA. Hit me up. Let me know how the family's doing, how you living. Let me know how you're momming them. And trust Who Dat Nation, I'll holla at you.